The Iranians look down on Arabs. They call them lizard eaters, desert rats.
An Iranian regime which continues to oppress its people, to attack its Sunni adversaries as well as Israel.
Is the time that they can overthrow this awful regime, which is terrorizing them. Do you realize that the Iranian government is lying to us?
Welcome back to another episode of Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs. And today we're talking about the Iranian regime after Raisi. Prospects for change or more of the same. With us today is a real Iranian regime specialist, Dr. Rhode, longtime veteran of the U.S. Department of Defense and a major expert on Iranian political culture. Dr. Rhode, welcome to the program. Great to have you on again, because the Iranian regime must take center stage on an international discussion that, allow me to say, has gotten the Iranian regime wrong.
In order to understand Iran, you have to understand it as they see what's going on. I don't care how well they speak English. They're Iranians, and they think in their own cultural terms. What's going on there? We think that the regime is, they all speak with one voice. Underneath the tyrant who rules them, Khomeini, are all sorts of factions. And the difference between them, for example, and other places in the world, when you disagree, you try, number one, to undermine your opponents, or shall we say, if they disappear or if they get killed, that's all right too. And there are two major factions that I know of, and I'm sure there are more, but this is what I know, in the Iranian regime. One is the Grand Ayatollah. He matters. He's old. He's about 86, and he's sick. He has cancer. And the question is, who will come after him? He would like to have his son take his place. Now, his son doesn't have the religious qualifications that Grand Ayatollah Khomeini has. And one of the son's enemies was the Iranian president, Raisi. He did have the qualifications. So the fact that he died was, you said, oh my God, what's going to happen? I wouldn't be surprised, given the way the religious establishment at times works in Iran, that Khomeini actually might have even had a hand in eliminating Raisi. I don't know this, but Raisi, whom he wanted before, is now an impediment for Khomeini's son to take over. I don't know, but it could be very much within Iranian historical tradition that Khomeini might have had a hand in Raisi's demise.
But so what does this mean, Harold, for the internal structure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as well as Qom, the theological center of the Iranian regime? Because many people in the West, in the post-October 7th reality, still do not see Iran as having emerged from the shadows. They still see Iran as somewhere several numbers of thousands of kilometers away, doing whatever they're doing, playing footsie with the U.S. administration, negotiating positively, threatening negatively, fronting the Palestinian issue as if that's the major conflict that the West has to deal with. And apparently, if you look at the statements coming out of the Biden administration, they have succeeded to instill or embed this type of disinformation in the West, that it's the Palestinian issue, as opposed to what I think you and I know. There's a much, much deeper, more ominous threat that is emerging, that has been present from the Iranian regime for decades, that the West must pay attention to.
The IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, which is the major military force, they're also a force that Khomeini has to deal with. Unfortunately, the American government refuses to understand the Iranians as they see themselves. And the result is the Iranian government has always playing games and making the Americans believe all sorts of things that the Americans want to believe about the regime. For example, let's take the two-state solution here between Israel and the Muslim Palestinians in Judea-Samaria or the West Bank. Iranians don't care about Arabs. Arabs are like paper towels. You kill one here or one dies here, you get another one to do the dirty work. They don't care about a two-state solution. We have to understand that if we give in the West, the United States or Israel, and go for a two-state solution, the Iranians will simply work their way into the West Bank even more than they are now, and it will become a base which will destroy the Arab regimes pretty much everywhere, because that's what the Iranians want to do. They want to undermine this, the Arab Sunni regimes. Sunni Arabs of the West Bank are nothing more than pawns, and they're expendable in the grand game.
And so what happens now within the IRGC, while we do know, just to finish your point, that there are IRGC operatives and affiliates and proxies in what's called the former West Bank of Jordan, what we understand in Israel as Judea and Samaria, they use the Hebrew expression Yudea v'Shomron. We know that they're in Palestinian Authority-controlled cities. We know that the Iranian regime, this is a matter of public record, has supplied ammunition and weapons and training and inspiration to their Sunni affiliates. But within the IRGC, there are cracks in the structure of the IRGC. Some people are trying to flee. Other people are trying to take over. How do we understand what's happening within this IRGC that's also cracking?
A lot of the Iranian leaders, including senior IRGC, they all have money in banks in the West, and most of them have children in the United States or Canada, because in case they fall, they need to be able to have a refuge.
And I want to talk about that refuge in just a second, Harold. We're going to go off to a commercial break and come back and talk about IRGC in America between the regime's children and the children of the West. Just stay with us. We'll be right back for segment 2 of Israel Under Fire. Welcome back to Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. I'm here with Dr. Harold Rhode, longtime Pentagon veteran and expert on Iranian regime political culture. Dr. Rhode, we were just in the last segment talking about the children of the regime, and the regime's bank accounts in the United States are very much let's call it a safety net for members of the regime whose children are in American universities, who are working in the United States, who have money in the United States. What does that mean in terms of the relationship between the United States government and governments and the Iranian regime as you see it?
The Iranians know the following. They've always lived in a dangerous situation. There can be coups, that people can be overthrown. And so families need to have people in all camps. To give you an example, a friend of mine his father was a senior Ayatollah in Qom, which is one of the religious centers in Iran. And at one point, the father got all his sons together, and he said, we have to protect our family for the future. So one of his children he assigned to be in the religious establishment. Another child, another son was in the communists. Another was in with the former Shah's family, friends, whatever. In other words, whoever wins, they can protect their money, they can protect their families. That's how Iranians work. Public opinion doesn't matter. But really what is important, given the situation now that the Iranian president and foreign minister have been eliminated, died. They're with their 72 versions because they're calling them martyrs in paradise. Whatever the case may be, the Iranian people, this is what they're looking for and why it is so important. There are only two important questions to understand the survival of the regime. Does the regime have both the ability and the will to keep itself in power? If it does not, then the regime will collapse. And the people who know this, I can tell you from my own experience, I went through the early and mid stages of the Iranian Revolution against the Shah. I was studying at a university in Mashhad in northeastern Iran. And I watched, if you wish, you could call it public opinion, go from pro-Shah to pro-Khomeini. And it was overnight. So it doesn't matter whether they support or not. They're trying to survive. That's what Iranians do. I can only tell you that the more that the Iranian regime looks weak, the more the people are out in the streets screaming and yelling things like, please, Israel, strike, take care of the regime, and we will go out in the streets and do the rest. If the regime is proved to be weak, all bets for the survival of the regime are off.
They complain and express great dissatisfaction at the free world's support of the regime, which delegitimizes the pro-freedom opposition inside Iran. So they say, why is it that the free world, led by the United States and the Western Alliance and our allies in Europe, are legitimizing and strengthening the very terror-ridden, human rights violating regime that they, the pro-liberty, pro-freedom, pro-West, 90% of the Iranian people, according to the former deputy prime minister of Iran, are pro-West. And it is the West that keeps imprisoning the vast majority of the Iranian public behind the bars of Iranian regime authoritarianism.
Well, how do these Iranian people see what is going on? Vis-a-vis the United States, they by and large think the following. Clearly, the American government, that is the Biden administration, is doing everything it can to keep the regime in power. So, from the Iranian people's point of view, and this we get from many, many sources and indications, they believe that in the general Middle East, there are two alliances. On one side, you have the American government and the Iranian regime working together, and it includes the Iranian regime's proxies, which are Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. The Hezbollah is the same type of Shiites that are in Iran, and the religious aspect is absolutely essential to understand this. Houthis are a different type of Shiites, but they're Arabs, so they're expendable as far as the Iranian regime.
Let's not forget, Harold, that although the Hamas are Sunni, yeah, they are also Sunni. They are also considered today a virtual proxy of the Iranian regime, receiving weapons, money, inspiration. By the way, there have been photographs of Khamenei in Gaza for the last number of years that can be seen online, but people are somewhat unaware of them.
This is true, but remember, the Iranians look down on Arabs. They call them lizard eaters, desert rats, and all sorts of things, which are obviously not good. And so they're inferior people from an Iranian point of view, and they're expendable. They can be, if they die, who cares? From the Iranian regime's point of view, they're useful idiots. And we in the West, instead of trying to see the world as the Iranians do, the Iranian government does, and for that matter, Iranian people, because it's different, we listen to their words and accept them at face value. And the regime simply can look you right in the face, the leaders smile, while they're lying at you. We in the United States can't do that because we look away if we're lying. It's part of our culture. You can't look at someone in the face and lie. We don't want to see this. What I'm describing is not what you say in American English. It's not rocket science. It's easily understandable, but it has ramifications. You realize that the Iranian government is lying to us. And once we realize that, it would mean we'd have to change the way we're doing things. And the American government is not prepared to do that. So who are the losers? Who is the losers? It's the American government. It's the Iranian people. It's anybody who believes in getting rid of the tyranny that rules Iran. That Iran should return to be an honored member of the international community, not trying to kill everybody else, not trying to take over the world, not trying to take over the Middle East.
In the third segment of our program today, Harold, is how does the free world emerge victorious together with the majority of the Iranian people, together with America's allies, as opposed to submitting to decades more of Iranian terror, authoritarianism, deception, and disinformation? Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Israel Under Fire. I'm Dan Diker, here with Dr. Harold Rhode, Iran expert and all things Middle East. Harold, we were discussing the prospects for victory in the West over an Iranian regime which continues to oppress its people, to attack its Sunni adversaries as well as Israel, as we saw in the April 14, 2024 massive missile attack, also against Israel, but also against Arab states in the Middle East, an unprecedented event. How is the access, let's call it the access of liberty and freedom, going to defeat what the international community is called the world's leading supporter of terrorism against the international community?
The easiest thing to do, and I mean this, is basically to help the different factions in Iran, that is in the government, do what is natural to them: fight and at times kill each other. They're very good at that. That's number one. Number two, if you want to be polite, you tell the Iranian government you're encouraging Hezbollah in Lebanon to do things vis-a-vis Israel, which Israel is supposed to be our ally, the United States' ally. We're going to do what President Trump did. President Trump took out Qasem Soleimani, who was head of really the brains behind the Iranian force and all that. For 1 year after the American government took out Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians were the government were nice little children, because they were afraid what the American government would do. The only way we can succeed is that the Iranian government needs to fear us. On the day that President Raisi and the foreign minister, Abdullahian, died in this helicopter crash, the Iranians were out in the streets in public places. They were on the metro, the Iranian metro in Tehran, yelling, "Death to the dictator, death to Khamenei." They saw that, oh my God, this is a chance that maybe is the time that they can overthrow this awful regime, which is terrorizing them. And just hopefully there's a chance, if America really wanted to, let's say, we love to solve things in the United States. If America really wanted to have peace and quiet, it has to be strong. It has to, whether we like it or not, we have to be the boss and say, this is how things are going to go. We will support our allies. Who are our allies? In this case, the Saudis, the Israelis. Hold it up to standards that we let the Iranians kill. They've killed so many of their own people, and we say nothing. We do nothing. But for the Israelis, the Biden administration is often inventing situations. They want to sanction this person, this part of the Israeli military, but they don't do anything to the Iranians. How do the Middle Easterners understand it? I think I said before, on one side, it's the American government and the Iranian government and its proxies. On the other side are the Arab regimes that the Iranian government, and by the way, America is abandoned its Sunni allies. So it's Iranian regime, the American regime and proxies on one side versus the Arab Sunni regimes and Israel on the other. This is all crazy as far as the Middle East. The Iranians think this way. The Arab regimes think this way. This way of looking at the world makes no sense to either America or Israeli. But what America is doing by choice is helping to bring down its traditional allies in the Arab world, and it's trying to bring down the democratically elected government of the State of Israel.
Well, here you have it, Harold Rhode. It's really fear, not friendship, when it comes to the Iranian regime. So this is, I think, an element, a component of regional relations that the Saudi-aligned Middle East, we call it architecture, which is Saudi, Israel, the Gulf states, and beyond. Notice as we end our program this time that there are no massive demonstrations in Arab capitals not supporting the Iranian regime, nor calling for condemnations of Israel in its war over Hamas, which the Sunni establishment knows is an equal threat, together with their Iranian taskmasters, to the entire Middle East's stability, security, and prosperity. So we leave this with a tribute to our teacher, Professor Bernard Lewis, who foresaw this already back in 1976 in that path-breaking article he wrote, The Return of Islam. I suggest we all go back and reread it, because it is happening in front of our eyes today in 2024. Dr. Harold Rhode, longtime Iran expert and expert in Iranian culture, almost 30 years at the U.S. Department of Defense on these issues, all things Middle East. Thank you ever so much for shedding light and perspective and context on what is a very complex state of affairs here in the Middle East. And we hope that the access of freedom and liberty will prevail over the forces of darkness that we see in Tehran today. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, Harold Rhode.
From your mouth to God's ears, Dan.
We also want to thank our partners in the United States, JLTV, for their leadership, friendship, and this great platform to communicate these critical ideas to the American people and beyond.